Good morning, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I thank Stefan for inviting me, and I was a graduate student at Harvard when Masao came for a semester, and that's when I met him. And then later he was kind enough to be a reader for my dissertation, and we remained friends for almost 30 years. The second time I met him, I said, "Professor Miyoshi," and he turned around and said, "Cut out that shit." He said, "Call me Masao." I said, okay. And then I remember going to a Chinese restaurant, and I was telling him how I had been a hippie in Ibiza, Spain, and I liked to use chopsticks because of the wood. He said, "I like the taste of and the feel of metal on my teeth. I only use forks." And so right away I knew he was quite unpredictable. And I called him once to tell him that a professor friend of his and mine was retiring from Harvard. And he said, "Tell him I thought he retired years ago." And when another Harvard professor sent him his latest book, Masao responded to him and said, "You should have titled it Scholar on Vacation." And the professor retired 1 year later, recognizing that he was a fraud, in his own words. Masao changed people's lives, and he held up a mirror so people could kind of see themselves unvarnished. And once I came back from Japan, I had organized an exhibit of a photographer, Yamamoto Kansuke, whose works, he died many years ago, but his works will be at the Getty Museum in 2013. And I gave the catalog to Masao, and he just held the book in his hand and looked at me and said, "Is this important?" And I said, "Not really, but I had fun." He said, "Okay, that's good." And I remember in 2007 he said, "Literature died because nobody bought it. Art died because everybody bought it." And he always had a humor and a sharpness of insight and a kind of unassailability in what he was saying. But he also said to me, "When you write criticism, don't use humor too much, otherwise people won't take you seriously." I organized a couple of his talks. One, I'll leave these posters over there with the book so later you can take a better look at them. But one of them was later in his book Off Center about bashing. You may remember in 1990-91 there was a lot of Japan bashing going on when their economy was very strong. And so people thought he was going to come and defend Japan, but actually he gave a lecture called Bashing, an Exercise in Cross-Cultural Criticism. And he kind of was against both sides, and I asked him to send some visuals for the poster. And as you can see later, he sent these visuals of Japanese in the 19th century bashing the Westerners, including one of a decapitated head. And so he had quite a sense of humor and also a sense of the visual. He had a real attention to graphics and aesthetics of the poster. The poetry of his titles was always something that was important, and the unpredictability of his content, the persuasiveness of his argument, very logical, well thought out. But as Stefan mentioned, he was always open to criticism and changing points of view. And I reread his bashing article in Off Center, and it's amazing how he's so even-tempered and giving people their credit when they're due, and then smashing them when he thinks that they're off. And he was like a kind of versatile athlete. Well, in 1996, Paul Tagliabue, who is the National Football Commissioner, his son graduated from Amherst College, and so the history professor there got the father to give some money for a series of lectures. And I kind of hijacked the thing at that point and said, "Could I take over organizing?" They said, "Okay." So I then called up Masao and said, "Would you please give a lecture that's quite provocative?" And he called me back a few weeks later with the title, "Japan is Not Interesting." And then a bunch of these posters were all over campus, and people were getting really angry about it. They said, "Oh, he can say it because he's Japanese," and You know, and in his article and in the lecture, he talked about these things. But the president of the college had his secretary call me and say, please cancel this because we're in the middle of a $200 million capital campaign and this is going to ruin everything. So I said, no, this is academic freedom, much more important than your money. So and then they said, the public affairs doesn't know how to publicize this. It's really perplexing. So I called Masao and I said, what do you suggest they do? And he said, just tell them to put the word provocative in there. That should, take care of everything. And, he trespassed into the infrastructure of the institution and trampled where fundraising took place. I was told not just to talk about Masao, so I'm going to mention a few things about the future of the humanities. And actually, I was rereading an essay by Bertrand Russell from 1932 called In Praise of Idleness, in which he makes the suggestion that in the coming technological age, everyone should work only 4 hours a day and spend the rest of the time cultivating their mind. And it's a very short essay, you can find it online, but I just wanted to read a few salient quotes from it. Modern technique has made it possible for leisure, within limits, to be not the prerogative of small privileged classes, but a right evenly distributed throughout the community. The morality of work is the morality of slaves, and the modern world has no need of slavery. The idea that the poor should have leisure has always been shocking to the rich. Wage earners are expected to overwork or starve. The modern man thinks that everything ought to be done for the sake of something else, and never for its own sake. Broadly speaking, it is held that getting money is good and spending money is bad. This is absurd. One might as well maintain that keys are good, but keyholes are bad. When I suggest that working hours should be reduced to 4, I am not meaning to imply that all the remaining time should necessarily be spent in pure frivolity. I mean that 4 hours work a day should entitle a man to the necessities and elementary comforts of life, and that the rest of his time should be his to use as he might see fit. The pleasures of urban populations have become mainly passive. This results from the fact that their active energies are fully taken up with work. If they had more leisure, they would again enjoy pleasures in which they took an active part. Without the leisure class, mankind would never have emerged from barbarism. Above all, there will be happiness and joy of life instead of frayed nerves, weariness, and dyspepsia. They used to call it dyspepsia, now they say stress. Modern methods of production have given us the possibility of ease and security for all. We have chosen instead to have overwork for some and starvation for others. Hitherto, we have continued to be as energetic as we were before there were machines. In this, we have been foolish, but there is no reason to go on being foolish forever. I would also like to quote from another mentor of mine, Kenneth Rexroth, who taught at the University of California at Santa Barbara and was a great poet and painter and critic. And in 1968 and 69, he wrote an essay which included the following suggestions for the humanities. This is when Chicano studies and black studies and Asian studies were just getting off the ground. And Kenneth suggested, create a department of ethnic studies for whites, WASP remedial education, to teach the upper middle class social illiterates from the high schools of Southern California and suburbia how to get along with other Americans. Grant immediately the demands of the junior faculty, TAs, and graduates for effective roles in faculty life, where now they are second-class citizens at best and indentured servants in the lower echelons. No grades, make all courses pass-fail. Abolish the title of honored doctor. In America, it is the height of bad manners to call anyone but a medical man doctor. Nobody calls the other folks master or bachelor. If a student calls you doctor, tell him to take 2 aspirins and a hot bath and call you in the morning. Abolish the quarter system. Even the semester system is absurd. It takes months even to start a class into a subject and to establish the community necessary for the educative relationship to begin. This is certainly true of the graduates of Southern California, upper middle class suburbia, so desperately in need of remedial education. No student can begin to learn until he has mastered the meaning of the slogan that launched the Paris, May 1968 days. When examined, answer with questions. And Masao was always questioning and asking questions.
What's the name of that restaurant for?
This is from the Alternative Society. Yes, thank you for asking. And then I just wanted to make a couple of comments on my own. And imagine a United States which doesn't conduct a war for 20 years. That would be a truly scary scenario for many people. The technological edge enjoyed by the US needs constant testing. And I have a little pet peeve, but I really want people in the media and everywhere else to stop calling US post-World War II wars by the names of the invaded countries, as if displacing the responsibility to the victims. We should stop saying Vietnam War and correctly say the US war in Vietnam. The same should be the US war in Iraq, the US war in Afghanistan. And when that is done, people will understand that these are always the US wars continuing. Somehow by displacing it, I went to Vietnam and nobody calls it the Vietnamese War or Vietnam War. It's called the American War, you know. So I think people here should also start doing that. And one thing I just want to bring up as something maybe we can discuss later is the US anti-intellectual strain as being historical and deeply rooted, despite the building of a substantial infrastructure of academic activity that is highly respected worldwide. And in a 1990s NHK Japanese documentary with Masao Miyoshi and Edward Said, Edward Said made a really good point that the main problem that's coming up between the university and the society at large is that even though people in the university system are always spinning a lot of jargon and talking to each other and refining their ideas, this is not really going into the society at large in a meaningful way. And how can that step be made? That is the crucial test for the university in the years ahead. And the universities are often seen as kind of expendable. After the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami in Tokyo, a lot of the art exhibits were canceled and all the news turned to politics and economics. And it's kind of like art for art's sake, or the usefulness of uselessness, which used to be something that people thought was valuable, but now it needs ever more to be justified, which is really a paradox and a dilemma. And as long as the humanities are seen as a kind of frivolous sideshow, much like the tabloids are always wasting time with sideshows that keep people away from the real issues, I think then the medicine and science and all those fields will just keep taking over as they have been until now. Masao Miyoshi, in one of his last essays, talked about ecology and the extinction of the species. And he said that the cockroaches will still survive. So I, as my last thing up here, would like to suggest that the Humanities Center be renamed as the Cockroach Center. Thank you very much.